Hey everyone, my name's Ryan. I'm with Halt the Harm Network and part of the A to Z Impacts of Plastic Summit team here. Super honored to be here and just to say hi to everyone, see everyone here. We're using Zoom for this event, obviously, and in the top right, you can switch between speaker view and gallery. And so I want to invite everyone who wants to turn on their video to click on gallery view, because you can see other people who are here and we can all wave hello. It's really fantastic. And we have some amazing guests here today that will be introduced in just a moment. So a couple more details here. I'll be doing some technical support throughout this event. You can find me in the chat here in Zoom. If you have any questions at all, feel free to post them. I'd be happy to help. Also, we are recording. You can turn your video on and off. We will keep everybody muted throughout the panel part of the discussion. And please stay tuned for the Q&A portion and the networking sessions that are part of this event today. And I think that's it. And I'm going to turn this over to BJ to start this event. So thank you so much, BJ.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I hope you've all had some coffee and you're all settled in to be relaxed and ready to listen. And I'm going to introduce myself in just a minute as soon as I bring up my little notes here. So yeah, good morning. I'm BJ McManama. I'm an organizer with the Indigenous Environmental Network. But today and throughout this series, I'm here as a West Virginia mother, grandmother, and a person who loves my state, our region, our culture, and our people. I'm a descendant of the Haudenosaunee keepers of the Western Door, the Seneca. And I often wondered why, when I came here in the early 70s, why I almost instantly found an affinity with this place. I mean, I was born and raised in the southern tier of New York State, my traditional territory. So through the years, by a series of seemingly unrelated events, I found documentation that the Seneca were here, along with the Shawnee, the Lenni Lenape, Cherokee, Mingo, Tuscarora, and so many more. Of course, we were told that these lands weren't occupied, but were simply hunting grounds or just a pass-through. And we know that isn't true. Just more history written by the dominant culture. I even left here for 16 plus years, but I couldn't stay away. Something, along with a series of events and situations, brought my family and I back to the home place. But we know there's really no such thing as coincidence. So that's why I'm here and have continued to work with the organizers of the A to Z Impacts of Plastic. Today is the culmination of months of work, brainstorming, late nights, long conference calls and Zooms and emails and texts and messages. So right now I want to acknowledge the people I've shared these experiences with. They're leaders in their own right. So I'll start out with Mary, who keeps us on point. And this was kind of her dream. And she shared it with us, and we're really glad that she did that. We have Kelsey, who's super awesome, organized, and we turn to her for many things. Ryan, our tech rock, you heard him. He has the patience of a saint dealing with us tech challenged people. Alice, who's a deep thinker, you'll hear from her later. She's going to be facilitating our second half. And then we've got Diane and Peggy and all of the speakers and advisors we've had in the past, Matt, Mark, Patricia, Leatra, Leanne, Justin, and Julie, who has joined us again today. Thank you very much. And if I've forgotten anyone, I sincerely apologize. So today we gratefully thank the following grassroots leaders for graciously giving of their time and sharing their wisdom and perspectives with us. We have Diane Wilson from the Gulf region. She's a shrimper and activist who fought Formosa and won a $50 million settlement. No small feat. We've got William Barber III, who leads the Strategic Partnership for the Climate Justice Reality Project, Climate Justice Initiative, and who contributed to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline victory. We've got Ranjana Bhandari, founder of the award-winning grassroots environmental group Livable Arlington, who successfully stopped an injection well in her Texas community. We've got Luke Early. He's a youth activist in Cincinnati. We honor our youth and we support and look to them to grow into the leaders who will inspire and empower the coming generations. And we're excited to hear what he has to say. And finally, and totally not last or least, is Julie Dermansky, my friend, who is a stellar environmental journalist, a photojournalist for DSmog Blog and other national media outlets, who gives voice to the communities struggling in the wake of destruction from extractive industries. While we listen to the presentation, we'd like our audience and attendees to place your questions or comments into the chat. I'll be monitoring and doing my best to present as many of these as we have time for. And I remind you that these conversations can continue at our campaign website, impactsofplastic.com. Join the community, and right before we close today, we'll hear how the next segments of today's events will continue. So without any more of my yapping, let's begin. To start, let's hear how our winners prevailed over the industry. So I think I'll call on, and this is no order of importance, I'm going to call on Diane Wilson first. So the first question or request that we have is, first, please expand on your who you are, where you're from, whatever. And I think we're most interested in what advice we can get from your lessons learned on how we here in the Ohio River stop the onslaught from the industry that you fought and won, to highlight maybe the strategies or solutions, actions that you and others in your community did that made a difference in your win. So I now will mute myself and take myself off camera, and we can listen to Diane.
Well, thank you very much for having me here on this nice hurricane winter out here. And I'm a fourth generation fisherwoman. I've lived in this area for, my family has been here for probably since 1890. So I know and I love this place. And probably when I turned 40 years old, I was working at a fish house. I had been running a shrimp boat, but I was working at a fish house, and I had a shrimper that had cancer. He kind of threw me this article on my desk, and the front page headlines was that our county was the #1 place in the nation for toxic disposal. We had half the waste generated in Texas. This was the first time the toxic release inventory ever came out. Y'all heard the community right to know, the TRI data. Well, the first time it came out in June of 1989, my tiny little county, probably 18,000 people, we were #1 in the nation. And it pretty much blew me away. I'm a natural introvert. I don't like talking, which was probably why I'm such a good shrimper. I like being myself out there on a boat. But I acted out of character. And you can act out of character. I know a lot of people say, well, I'm this way, and I'm not a leader, and I'm not a talker, and I'm not an organizer. And so they put themselves in this little box, and they're waiting on somebody else who is going to do it. And unfortunately, there was nobody else. So I went to my city hall, and I walked in, and I told them, I wanted to have a meeting about that article. And I'm sure most of you people there, I dare say every one of you have been in a place where conversations like this are not welcome, you know. And so when I did this, by the next day, I had the secretary come down to the fish house, and people don't normally come down to the fish house except fishermen or maybe their families when the boats come in. And they came in and they said I was going to have to start moving this, have to start moving the meeting. because there were red flags going up. And I totally didn't understand what on earth they were talking about. And then I had the bank president come down. Then I had economic development come down. And they wanted to know if I was started a vigilante group. And I hadn't even had the meeting yet, you know. So, I mean, they did not want anything started at all. So there began a 30 years of fighting Formosa. So the one thing I can tell people, if there's any advice, is be persistent and be persistent and be persistent. And I know when it seems that maybe it's all against you and the sweetheart deals are already made, and when it seems like you're not going to get anywhere through your permit hearings or your lawsuits or your petitions or your city meetings, it's like what I started doing, and I had nobody that supported me. I had no money, no support. Everybody thought I was a nut. They still, I'm kind of known down here as the crazy woman. And what I started doing, because I said they were not going to get that bay. It was like a line, you know, the old cliche about you draw the line in the sand. Well, you really do. You draw it in the line in the sand and you mean it, and your intention is to keep that bay from harm. And so what I started doing, totally out of character, with no advice, with no knowledge, I started doing the civil disobedience. And so, Formosa, I have spent most of my 30 years fighting Formosa. I fought DuPont, Union Carbide, NEOs, BP Chemical, but mainly most of the years I've fought Formosa Plastics. And for the last 10 years, I have been focusing on the plastic that is coming from their facility, because this is a huge plastic facility. I know the folks in Appalachia. I know the folks in Louisiana. I know the folks down Corpus Christi around Portland. I mean, they're looking at $9 billion in production of these plastic. And people kind of wonder, is like, well, what's the big deal about plastic, you know? And then they've heard nurdles and they're like, well, what in the heck is nurdles? Because they hear their little tiny little thing. Well, I'm going to screen share just for a second. I hope I can do this without wiping everything out here. Hang on a minute. I'm going to show y'all something. Where is it? Wait a minute. Okay, if y'all see that, that is on the left there is pellets. The workers call it pellets. It's in the water. It was in the water. It's in the creeks. It's in the bays, because these chemical companies, plastic, they discharge their stormwater, and they have many of those, and their industrial waste stream into the water. They got to be around water. And on your right is the powder. That's polypropylene, or probably polyethylene powder, which they make. They make all of that. And so this is the type of pollution I was fighting. And believe it or not, this is another piece of advice. You get your allies where you get your allies. And mine was a little unusual, because mine were the workers in the plant. And the reason why they were the workers in the plant is because when you have a company that buys out a community, they buy out the hearts and the souls of the people, there is a great deal of fear. So when a worker cannot go to the company, they can't go to the state or federal agencies, they can't go to your district attorneys, because they're getting computer systems from the company. You can't go to the mayors because they have a contract with the company. And I'm sure all of you small little groups out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. they do by the hearts and the minds. And so I started getting the workers in the plant that would come to me. They would show up at the fish house with a gun in their trucks because they were so afraid. And they would give me all of this information. They gave me photographs, they gave me documents, and they told me these stories. So for probably the last 15 years or more, my allies have been the workers in the plant. And it was a whistleblower from Formosa Plastics. He finally decided he was going to trust me one day, and I had to meet him in a beer joint to before, way away from anybody else because he was afraid to be seen with me. And he wanted to tell me about those pellets and that powder. And the powder that you see on the right there that's in the water, it's also all over the facility, and the workers are breathing it. And it's laced, especially if it's PVC, polyvinyl chloride, it's laced with vinyl chloride. And the workers were breathing it. It was in their hair, it was on their uniforms, and the company wasn't giving them masks, so they had to go to Walmart and buy a handkerchief to wear around their face to just protect themselves. And so for the last 10 years, because I got no help from any agency, no elected official, no help from the chemical company who says point blank, they have never discharged a pellet, And like I said, I have over 2,500 examples. I've got 7,000 videos and photographs of this very same thing. We collected it over 3.5 years, and me and just a few guys, I'd say 3 or 4, we found the only lawyers we could get was legal aid. So we got the Texas Rio Grande legal aid, and they took the risk of going to court against this multi-billionaire international polluter, and we took it to court. We used a citizen suit of the Clean Water Act, and that means if the agencies will not prosecute, a citizen has a right. So that's what we did, and we took it to court, and believe it or not, we won. We and we got a $50 million settlement from them for projects in our community, environmental projects in our community. And the other important thing is we got zero discharge. There is no plastic and pellets to be put into the bay. And if it is, we get enforcement. We get $15,000 per day per bay system for every violation they do. And so anyway, and I don't have the education. I always thought I was the wrong person to do this, but it's like sometimes a little bit of information is given to you, and it's what you do with that information that will determine the rest of your life. And all I had was intention. That line in the sand is like, they're not getting it. And so that's my advice. Be persistent. Don't give up.
Awesome, Diane. Awesome. Oh, wow. The comments are coming in. You're a hero. You're exactly what we need. And my thoughts and what I've been preaching or nagging to people is we've got to help others get out of their comfort zone, to
That's
tell
right.
them that we're just regular people. We just care about our communities. So I'm sure you'll get more questions. We'll go on to our next panelist right now, but wow, thank you so much. It's just such an inspiration. You're my hero. Thank you. We'll start with the women. I apologize, Will. We'll give a little preference to the ladies today. So, Ranjana, same question to you, and I'm thinking with what you did, you know, you held the corporate polluters and the corrupted government interests accountable, and were able to win. So I turn the microphone over to you so that you can share now. And remember, everyone, you can put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And Diane is a tough act to follow, but let me talk a little bit about our work here in Arlington. So I live in Arlington, a city on top of the Barnett Shale that embraced and welcomed fracking. Our city government has made $150 million in royalties from allowing urban drilling to go on here. We have 55 drill sites, more than 350 gas wells here, and most of them are right next to homes and schools. Arlington has been a conservative Republican community for most of the 25 plus years that I have lived here. Our elected politicians have been reliably strong supporters and enablers of fossil fuels, both in Congress and in the state legislature and in our city council. Excuse me, can you hear some background noise? I apologize. I'll be right back.
I don't hear anything.
I'm so sorry, that's my printer. Our group is known for crafting tough wins. I apologize for that. You know, trying to work from home, as you all know, can be hard. Sorry, let me start over. Our group is known for crafting wins in tough fights against oil and gas in Texas. How do we do it? And what did we learn from our organizing? Can David slay Goliath? And can David come back and do it again? Here are some of our organizing principles. First, articulate a positive vision. Our group here is a small mothers group, which stands for a livable Arlington and a livable planet for our children. Find common ground. I cannot emphasize this enough. Talk to everyone. I realized at the very outset that if I wanted to win in this political terrain, I would have to sway the other side. Don't subject people to a values test, a political test, and look to see if they stand on the same high moral ground as you. Is there common ground to be found? Yes, it turns out that there is. Our first big winning campaign was in 2017. Our Save Lake Arlington campaign stopped a wastewater disposal well by our city's eponymous lake, which supplies drinking water to our county. This well was approved by the state, overruling our local ban on injection wells. Our Republican elected leaders, who were very well funded by fracking money, passed a law that preempted local rules in the State House. We were a tiny group, and we had just received our first grant of $1,300. So how did we frame this fight? We made it about our drinking water. We made it about the water that our children drank. We talked to everyone. Not one person thought that it was a good idea. We ended up submitting 2,800 letters of opposition to the state, requesting standing for those 2,800 people in the public hearing about the well. The numbers were unprecedented and overwhelming for the State Railroad Commission, which regulates drilling. At one point, the director of hearings there asked me, how are you getting these letters? Where are you getting these letters from? And I told him, we talked to everyone in the community and nobody likes the idea of fracking waste in our drinking water. Media couldn't get enough of the story, and it became a public relations nightmare for industry and for their pet politicians. The company withdrew its application eventually after months of seeking postponements. People agreed with us about the water quality issue, but to this day, many of them still support the politicians who had brought this upon us. Their support is based on the heady brew they serve about identity politics, property rights, and other polarizing issues. Yet we managed to win. We focused on the common ground. Across our deep political divide, Both sides did not want their children to drink water laced with fracking waste. One side, of course, refused to see to this day that fracking creates fracking waste and that these same politicians brought fracking to our neighborhoods. Yet we won, industry lost, and the politicians that they had paid so handsomely could not deliver. This past June, our group stopped the permitting of gas wells in a Black and Latino neighborhood in Arlington. This has become a big national story because a win like this is very rare where we live. There are sacrifice zones and more polluters in neighborhoods where people of color live. This is because of policy and because often environmental campaigns were and still are white NIMBYism that concentrate polluters in communities of color. We organized by working with everyone in the neighborhood that was going to be impacted with this. We worked with leaders who were already there, working on other issues, not environmental issues. They worked on issues like immigrant rights and poverty and economic empowerment. We empowered people by passing around the best possible information on health effects, the permitting process, how to participate in public hearings. And we did this in short, quick, easy to read flyers in both English and Spanish. We talked to hundreds of people. We learned about the neighborhood. We learned about the neighborhood children who were suffering from asthma in large numbers. And when media came calling, we connected them to neighborhood representatives. Our job at Livable Arlington was to make it possible for these impacted residents to tell their story. This diverse coalition of neighborhood groups in Livable Arlington was able to stop the permitting of these gas wells. In winning with and for the most disadvantaged among us, we became a part of the larger struggle for justice and civil rights in our nation. So our next organizing principle is organize for environmental justice, fight for everyone. Focus on who is harmed, help them be the voice of their struggle so they can tell their own story. Those who are harmed should be front and center in campaigns. Does the leadership look like the harmed? Make sure it does. Empower people. What does that mean in our work? In the 5 years that we've been organizing here, our work has led to many more people, many more residents of Arlington knowing and understanding the harms of fracking, knowing how the permitting process works, knowing how they can participate in the process, when hearings happen, what the rules for participation are, how they can speak at hearings. So let me give you a couple of examples. A couple of years ago, we were organizing against gas wells next to a preschool. And we turned out hundreds of people at hearings. A lot of them were opposed to the idea of fracking, but didn't really know what they could say at a hearing, how they could make their 3 minutes count. So we would organize tailgates in the parking lot of City Hall, serve pizza, and while people were eating, walk around, give them talking points, tell them how the process worked, give them sometimes pre-written speeches. We would bring a stack of 20 speeches and pass them around to people who decided at the last minute that they wanted to speak and voice their opposition. When we were fighting the injection well, the railroad commissioner came to town because he thought he could charm people and tell all of us that this was a benign, harmless thing and we should all welcome it. A lot of people thought that he was such a terrible guy who was going to do this horrible thing to our community. We should boycott the town hall he was holding. Our group, on the other hand, turned out massive participation at the town hall. We posted more than 24 questions online for everybody, and every single question got asked because you typically just, if your name is called, you get one question. And I still remember this young man reading a question I had written on his phone. And it was a very empowering thing because people who had turned out for the first time to a hearing like this were able to participate, were able to ask questions, they were able to get heard. My next bit of advice, something I've learned, be opportunistic. For instance, in the win in June, where we stopped gas wells next to a preschool in a community that is overwhelmingly Black and Latino here, we used the disproportionate impact of the COVID pandemic on people of color to advocate against the drilling. And it was an argument that was convincing. It worked. Some more things I've learned. Be nice to people. Then they have to listen to you, even when they disagree with you. Be a resource. We do our homework. We learn everything we can that is relevant to the issue. And we are a resource for our community. We are a resource for media. We are a resource for our political leaders who come to us on when they have questions about drilling. And in becoming this resource, we are able to, sort of direct the public opinion, help people understand how fracking is harming us, how it's harming our community, our children, and our planet. Small wins. We've just heard about a very big win. We've had small wins where we live, and often people are disappointed by small wins. And this is how I see it. Small wins are a cause for hope, not despair. The choice is not all or nothing for us. It is take what you can today and come back for more tomorrow. Our children's lives are at stake when we don't get everything we want. We take what we can get, but we make sure we leave the other side weakened and damaged. We change hearts and minds, we grow our support, and we come back for more again. In November of 2016, after that election, there was deep despair. Our group changed. We knew that the fossil fuel empire had won the White House. Every time we had a small win locally, we were pushing back against that fossil fuel empire that has taken over our government. This was local resistance that made sense to us. So in closing, what I want to say is find common ground, fight for everyone, empower people, build allies, treat everyone well, grab every win, however small. Take every inch, even though it is not the mile you wish for. Stay calm, keep organizing, persistence and people power win. Thank you.
Wow. That was very inspiring, Ranjana. And yeah, thank you. There's a couple questions. We'll wait until we get to the end of this first round and we will start asking the questions. So I'd like to Luke Early, our youth activist. He's been listening to 2 of our winners and some of their advice. Would you like to add anything to what they've had to say so far? Any of your thoughts, questions you'd like to ask them?
I would like to add to the idea of small wins and coming back tomorrow that that is the goal, but also generally we need to increase the awareness of issues besides just visible gains, because you can't have visible gains until you have a mass of people on your side who don't even think they're activists. They just think they're concerned citizens. And ultimately, I believe that we need more than just incremental change, but a massive restructuring of all these institutions. Because currently the institutions are designed in a way that perpetuates them and even makes them worse. Like the nature of capitalism, it just requires that there will be a growing class divide. So there must be some change there that is more incremental. But the short term, it is always better to be incremental than no change at all.
Thank you very much. And we're going to try to get into that, what you just brought up. Thank you very much. I can't tell you how much the youth mean to some of us old folks, since it's going to be your world pretty soon. So thank you. We'll come back to you. Now, Will, we'd like to hear about your work, your contribution to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline being canceled. We hope it stays canceled. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, BJ. And it's, a pleasure and an honor to be here with each and every one of you. Today I see a couple of familiar faces, both from Climate Reality and Poor People's Campaign and just community work. So really glad to be a part of this conversation. So my background, organizational background, is right now I sit as the co-chair of the Ecological Justice Committee for the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign. I also work with Kelsey and Kelly at Climate Reality and manage our internal climate justice initiative work. And then I also sit in North Carolina on our Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board. So when we talk about, this issue of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, I tell everyone everywhere I go, I kind of look at it in those three buckets of work. And why that is more important is less about like the positions, but for me, the flexibility of being able to build coalition, to help build narrative, to be a bridge builder, between some of the dissonant areas when we look at these issues. I also come to this from a deeply personal background. My personal heritage is I'm from Eastern North Carolina, son of the South. So many of the communities that were impacted, by the pipeline resonated with me as areas where I grew up. I come to this as a person who has Black, Indigenous, Tuscarora, and white, ancestry. And so when I think about that for me informs how I look at the coalitions, right, that we form when we break out of boxes and don't allow ourselves to get into personal silos. And also come to this as a student of movement. My father, of course, was very involved with the NAACP, with the Forward Together movement, and now with the Poor People's Campaign. So early on, it has always been a lens for me to lead with this idea of coalition, right? Who is out there? Who are unlikely allies? Who do we need to bring to the table? So Diane's earlier points of breaking out of boxes, people often try to silo us, and also finding your, allies where they are. That resonates completely with my personal approach and some of what we try to contribute to the organizing, to the activism here in the Southeast against the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So I was first made aware of this issue back in 2014, where I actually started out as a legal intern at Clean Water for North Carolina. First made aware, like I said, of the project's impacts as we were doing research, and found a couple of alarming pieces, right? We dug into the research and saw that in terms of state impacts, 5 out of 6 of the counties where the pipeline was slated to go through in North Carolina had poverty rates higher than the state average. Alarming. We found 5 out of 6 of the counties where the pipeline was slated to go through had concentrations of people of color, black populations higher than the state average. Alarming. We found that there was a history where the pipeline was actually rerouted to avoid going through and impacting some of the more affluent areas like Wake County and other places, and was instead poised to directly impact rural areas, poor areas, low-income areas, and communities of color. Alarming. I started in this work, like I said, as a student. Coalition groups were on the ground doing this work for years, but that was my first inlet. And at that moment, I was leaning into this space at the intersection of environmental justice, which was really my first personal experience in organizing, and kind of the climate crisis. And so for me, 2014, seeing this project, knowing the implications it had for the climate situation, I said, this is something, I want to fight on, personally. Did not know what that would look like, did not know how long that fight would be, but was fully committed to saying, this is something I feel personally called to. As time went on, the impacts became more and more visible and expanded on a more broad regional level. So we looked and we saw that there was similar disproportionate impact when you talked about the entire route of the pipeline. So those same stats of this pipeline affecting poor areas, communities of color, rural landowners. Same was true not only in North Carolina, but also in Virginia and also in West Virginia. I mean, I'm not telling you all anything new. This is always the story, right? Is that, frontline communities bear the brunt, of these unnecessary fossil fuel projects. we saw that, you know, if built, it was a 600-mile natural gas pipeline, it would cut through some of the best preserved forests in Virginia. It would cut through those rural areas that were predominantly, you know, housing people of color and low-income households. We found that was more egregious that it cut through two communities, one being Union Hill, Virginia, which was a historic African-American community founded at the end of slavery by freed folk, freedmen, people. And even more insult to injury, the individuals who were selling the land to the pipeline company were descendants of the former slaveholders who were then turning around and impacting the land of descendants of the former enslaved. It cut through the community, indigenous community, the Lumbee community in Robeson County, where we have the largest concentration of the Lumbee tribe, the largest indigenous tribe in North Carolina. So all of these egregious impacts, right? And recognize that there was something that needed to be said in terms of elevating this environmental justice issue, elevating this narrative of what was going on to a larger public discourse. So asked ourselves, what was the question? Asked ourselves, what could we do to accomplish that? At the time, we were working in the Poor People's Campaign, working at Climate Reality, and we're taking and in conversation with many of the groups on the ground who were leading this work. So groups like Clean Water for North Carolina, groups like Friends of Buckingham, groups like Appalachian Voices, groups like the Southern Environmental Law Center. So many groups to name. I'm going to get in trouble if I start calling names, but what I want to be clear is, like, there were groups, we're just one piece of the puzzle. There were groups who were doing this work for decades, who were sowing the seeds, who were being diligent, who were elevating this narrative and getting ignored, but refused to give up. So that consistency was crucial in terms of giving room for other people to be positioned to help elevate this fight, elevate this narrative. Anyway, so what we did, the Poor People's Campaign Climate Reality, we understood that this fight, this project, sat at the intersection of all of the ills that we're talking about. It sat at the intersection of poverty and inequality, the intersection of systemic racism and environmental racism, the intersection of ecological devastation in terms of what it meant, not only for these communities on a local level in terms of local impacts, increased air pollution, disruption to land, threat to water resources, threat to forests, but also what it meant more broadly in terms of climate impact. This pipeline would emit more greenhouse gas emissions than it was estimated around 63 new coal-fired power plants. But proponents of it were trying to sell it to us as a project of clean energy, trying to use that discourse. So what we said is, how can we best be a value add to this engagement? And we said, recognizing our role as a convener and an amplification tool. The coalitions on the ground were already there. Communities were already doing the work. We didn't need to come in and do the work. What we had to understand is that having platforms, it was our responsibility to kind of amplify the work that communities were doing on their own already. And that's how we could really be in solidarity, taking kind of our cues from these communities and saying, okay, let's tell this story, but let's tell it on a broader scale. Let's really get people talking about it. So we looked at Union Hill, Virginia, and we leveraged the platforms of the Poor People's Campaign, Climate Reality. We hosted what would be known as our first environmental justice tour, where we called in my father, Bishop Barber, called in Vice President Gore, stood with community activists and gave them an opportunity to do public education and say, what is the real impact of what's going on here? What is the story that's not being told? We drove visibility of the issue by recruiting media. We drove this notion of not speaking on behalf of communities, but giving impacted folks the opportunity to speak on their own behalf. They know the situations, much more than we do. And then we committed to following up. So not just, doing a one-time event, but we committed to leaning in to the grassroots organizing, to what are the discrete events, to attending the public hearing sessions, to figuring out the channels to amplify the concerns of communities based on research, based on experience, into places where decision makers were trying to sweep this issue to the side. So when we talk about our state departments of environmental quality, Virginia and North Carolina, what were the ways to get these narratives there? We leaned into that. And, you know, I guess what I would say in terms of lessons from this, 5 steps and 3 lessons. 5 steps that I saw that were crucial to the success of this moment. One being research. You know, community scientists, citizen scientists rather, you know, did an incredible amount of work to really compile what was the disproportionate impacts, what were the health impacts, what were the places of concern for a project like this. That leads to step 2, and I think, Luke, you alluded to some of this, is the narrative construction, which when we talk about coalition and movement is so critical. The narrative that you put out there, a narrative that both highlights the situation, the reality on the ground, but also gives people inlets into how they can engage, give people the opportunity to see themselves as activists and leaders, not just as individuals say, oh, that's so bad. Call to action is important. The narrative that this is a diverse issue, I think, is so important. You know, when we break it out of those boxes, like it's not just people in one county, or it's not just people of one race, but this is an interracial issue. This is an intergenerational issue. It's an inter-issue issue. You know, it's not just a climate or environmental issue. That narrative construction is so important. The public education piece we found was very important. You know, one reason you amplify your narrative is not just to boost the visibility, but to give more people an opportunity to see what's happening, what's going on. And so we really leaned into that very heavily. 4th is, you know, trying to identify who are the disciples and unlikely allies who can continue to further your narrative. What we found is that as we created these inflection points of visibility, more and more people kind of flocked to the issue. We found that more and more allies were out there that we may ever have expressed or anticipated. You know, recognizing that this engagement was so large that one group could not solve it alone. So community groups could not solve it alone. The legal teams could not solve it alone. You know, the scientists who were concerned could not solve it alone. It took that collective engagement to really build what, in my opinion, was the first major example of Southeastern leadership in opposing a major pipeline project like this. And it all started in a little town of Union Hill, little town of Robeson County, places that had never been heard of, but would go and be the model for what resistance to these projects look like. Talk about a David Goliath situation. And where I will close is in terms of the lessons that I really personally pulled out of this experience are consistency, coalition, and conscience. A lot of that has already been articulated. Consistency, you know, having the stick-to-itness that, you know, for years, you know, when you're not getting the response you expect, but sticking to it for years, you know, continuing to engage. Coalition, you know, I think that speaks for itself, but that is so important when we talk about the power of communities going up against these powerful corporate entities. We can't win, you know, isolated. We have to find ways to find each other and to build these diverse coalitions. And then conscience. For me, you know, one piece that I continue to be amazed about is in that narrative construction. When you talk about what is right, when you talk about people, when you talk about how folks are being impacted, those realities, the human aspects, are some of the most powerful components of the narrative. The conscience that we have to kind of infuse into these processes is a major piece of what I think we offer as a value add in terms of the grassroots organizing. And I hope we continue to do that as we move forward. So that's what I have to say. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Wow, all of our speakers have been given so much clarity to this, to the struggles that we're facing. I mean, you know, the Indigenous, of course, our mandate, our focus is usually on our Indigenous concentration, you know, communities that are concentrated on our reservations and some in the urban setting. And we've been working across cultures, and what Will said about giving voice to these communities, and that's one of the things we do. We don't speak for them, we give them the tools and the training to give people their own story, to you know, just elevate what they're doing, get some support. And so I think, you know, as we move forward, this isn't really a question at this moment, but, you know, I want to reiterate to people that the Gulf, what they have suffered for so many years, decades, you know, we're going to be facing here in the Ohio River Valley. And if their plans to build this out as large and as expansive as they want, just about anything that we do from that moment forward is going to be pretty much moot, because what they're going to add to our you know, to everything, everyone's downstream, right? It's just going to be catastrophic. So we're looking to people in the Gulf, we're looking to people over on the West Coast, everyone that has been fighting these and have won some and continue to win and are teaching us how to win here. We are ever so grateful. So thank you very much, Will. You're just as inspirational as everyone else. So lastly, I'm going to call on Julie, because Julie gives voice, just what we were talking about, to these communities. She's a photojournalist and journalist, and so I'm going to turn this over to her to add any perspective or thoughts that she can at this time. And then we're going to go probably to a couple of questions. I'm getting some in the chat now. So thank you very much, Will. Julie.
Julie, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just thanking the panelists for the work they're doing for outreach to the media, and telling them how brilliant that is, because I think a lot of people don't realize that how badly the media as a profession has been gutted. And you can't imagine. That's one reason I look so tired, is when a big storm comes, I get so many calls for coverage because there aren't that many photojournalists left standing. Those that have been fired from the local papers, if you have a local paper, often can't make a living as a freelancer. So there aren't that many of us left. And then when people finally need pictures, it's very tiring. But the way you guys have been sending me stuff and making sure that local voices are accessible. So if someone does parachute in, it's a horrible term, and I get it. Some people don't like it. Like some reporter will be sent to here from New York to cover Cancer Alley, and they don't have time necessarily to really put in the groundwork. So they reach out to an activist organization, and then the organization hooks you up with one of the community people who live there and are fighting back, or to someone like me, and I'll share the information along. And that's like this incredible shortcut, because people don't have time to go around and talk to people on the street, and they need to find, or it's helpful to get your story out if you bring them to someone who can articulate the issues. I would say one thing I do, once I get to know people, or when I meet someone who's clearly new at it, I make sure to tell them never to be frightened of the media, and that they can choose what questions to answer. So I share back media talking points for them of how they can control their narrative. And I like to use the example of Sarah Palin. And people, Sarah Palin? Like, yeah, Sarah Palin wrote down her talking points on her hand, and whatever the media would ask her, she would just answer what was on her hand. So they would ask her what her favorite color was, and she'd talk about some project that she wanted to push. And it sounds really obnoxious, but often, especially with TV news, they just have like a second or two to put you in their 2-minute story. So if you just say what you want and that's all they have, that's what they're going to use. So that's a tip I'm going to pass forward on this, because I know a lot of you out there listening might be involved with responding to media inquiries. And the other thing I want to say is, I think it's really important when you tell your narrative, the best thing you can add to it without me even knowing your narrative is whatever connection you can give to the bigger story, because that's another thing. When someone has like a 2-minute block on TV or 1,000 words to tell a story, you're just getting a story, and people read it, and it might be a really important story, and they might really digest it for that minute, but it doesn't mean they're making the connection to the bigger picture. And that's part of the problem. No matter how many times I make the connection between natural gas and fracking and the plastic industry and what's coming to the Ohio Valley and what already exists in Louisiana's Cancer Alley and what a nurdle is, like Diane Wilson keeps putting out there, people forget. So it's not part of everyone's understanding yet how everything's connected. And we all notice that there's weather reporting. You see the fires, and I know you all who are listening here know climate change's impact. But just remember that overall overreaching point of how fracking contributes to the whole petrochemical build out. This is still not widely understood what a nurdle is. And so whatever your local fight is, if it's connected to getting the message out about oil and gas, I highly stress that that's key, because the small fights that are won, they're overturned by the bigger fights. You open up export, and that's gonna, which happened at the end of the Obama administration for oil and gas, and they kind of negate the smaller fights. They're wonderful victories, and they're immeasurably important for the local communities that don't have to take in that extra pollution. But overall, we're still going to be faced with climate change. So there's that. Is there something I missed, BJ?
No, absolutely not. And it's a perfect segue into what we'd kind of like to discuss next. And I've become a bit of a nag on this aspect. It's that, we're always trying to find the root of our problem, right? Because it seems like a lot of times we're just putting Band-Aids on an open wound, and it's not really helping. So consumerism, how we buy, how we single-use packaging, and how we just discard things. We trade in our cell phone every couple of years. Well, where does that cell phone go? The industry, the everything almost that we buy, we use, to our automobiles, to our shoes, to our clothes, have what's considered what we call planned obsolescence engineered into it, meaning it's like a Cinderella warranty. It's like, this item is only designed to be used or be useful for X amount of time, right? So I think what I'd like to ask our panelists now is, what do you see as the way forward? I mean, real meaningful, true systemic change away from consumerism, away from how we can talk to our community, how we can inspire them to change some of their own behavior. And I'm not putting it on the consumer, because the industry, the market, capitalism itself, they create markets, they create demand. We don't really create demand. They create it. They tell us what we need, and then that's all we get, right? So how can we, as community members, as a global community, as a national community, start to build a significant cultural shift away from consumerism and consumption, and come up with how we can still have a quality of life, we can be happy, we can be healthy, we can feed and house our families, but do it in a different way. Maybe we need to look to the past, right? I'm old. I can tell you all kinds of stories of how we did things in the past without plastics and without, single-use items, right? But I'd like to hear from our panelists, and I'm just going to kind of let you guys decide who wants to answer this, and then maybe go from there. And we do have a couple questions from the people that are here today, and we have 60, 70 people have joined us. We even have someone as far away as Scotland that came today. So I'm just going to open it up. What are your ideas? what do you think? How do you think we can move forward with this as a with love and respect? Okay, I'm just going to call on somebody. Okay. Diane, do you have any thoughts?
Now, I was afraid you was going to ask me.
I knew it.
But I can tell you what how it is in my small community, which is a very small county on the Texas Gulf Coast, and one of the most repeated complaints and criticisms that I get from the community, and it's probably because for most of plastics, which is like a $7 billion chemical, 2,500 acres, 5,000 workers. So it completely dominates it. So there are many workers, there are many contractors, there are many officials who have contracts. There's many people that have cousins who are working. So the criticism I get most is that I'm going to stop the plastic. And so some parts, the battle is huge. Right now, I'm just trying to get a plastic company to not destroy our bay. I am doing, and I have made, in my latter part of my years, I have made the connection with other national groups and brighter people like Julia there who have this connection of the bigger picture. And that's what gives me hope, because I take a look sometimes at my community and how it's just, like for instance, I was out there in my kayak and, going after samples, and I posted some of the pictures. And I mean, I get these people and they're like, oh, there she is in her plastic kayak, leaving her plastic kayak out there. And so I get hope knowing there's this bigger picture out there that sees the connection between the fracking and these petrochemical manufacturers and the consumerism and the recycling. And but there are some parts where unfortunately, I have a ferocious battle just keeping the plastic out of the air and out of the homes and out of the bays and out of the oysters out there and out of the, what the fish are eating and picking up the mercury in the bay and getting into the people that are eating the fish. So I know it's a very, very important issue, but I am sometimes I feel like I'm in a very dark part of the battle, and and I have been my struggle seems to be right now it's just fighting the pollution from the plastics.
Yeah, it's such a bigger problem. One of our people said it's a design problem, a system problem, more efficient to solve it by changing the structures. There was a bag ban here and suddenly everyone is bringing their own bags. Let's have a talking to the media training. It's a must have for getting messages across, and they thank Julie for that. So we've got another one, and stop me if I'm wrong. I don't know if anyone else, Will or Luke or I'm sorry, Ranjana, had anything to say about this last question, I guess, that I posed to you before I move on.
Yeah, BJ, I'd like to.
Okay, thank you, Will.
Yeah.
Sure.
you know, and I come at this very humbly, like I don't, you know, claim to have the answer here. I mean, there are multiple truths in this situation. I mean, I think I would lead again with what and echo, you know, this notion of consistency, coalition, and conscience. Just for me, those are fundamental cornerstones of how we must engage moving forward. More specifically, though, I think when you talk about shifting a culture or shifting a system, there's a certain degree of analysis that comes from that where it's different than like a different, you know, discrete campaign. When you're talking about a culture or a system, I think there are multiple categories of pieces you're trying to actually move. I think there are individuals, lay people who are just kind of responding and existing in the system. I think that there are then entities that serve as engines to kind of benefit and maintain and perpetuate a system. And then I think there are decision makers, you know, categories of decision makers who, you know, with one stroke of a pen can kind of, you know, introduce some significant influence or a different direction. I think, you know, when you talk about shifting a culture or system, you have to look at it from a kind of bird's eye view and two pieces: strategic pressure and strategic wins. Strategic pressure, I think, is looking at how do we, in looking at those multiple categories that exist in the system, what are the places we can collectively apply strategic pressure? You know, what are the inflection points of the moment, whether that be narrative, whether that be, you know, people we need to be, you know, petitioning and lobbying, you know, what does that look like? Strategic wins, I think, is important because, in my opinion, it helps us avoid what is known as the paralysis of analysis. Like when you have such a major shift that is necessary, you know, such a global shift that is necessary, it is easy to kind of spiral and say we're up against, you know, we're hitting our head against the wall. I think when you step back and recognize that when you talk about shifting a culture or shifting a system, that type work is not going to be fully completed in any of our lifetimes. And some might say that's morbid, but I don't think so. I think it's actually hopeful because it then breaks down what we're called to do to a more discrete kind of digestible piece. And we can frame it by flipping the question on our head is how do we not necessarily change the system in our lifetime, each of our limited time, but what are the places, the strategic wins that we need to accomplish in our lifetime that allow a foundation for the next group of activists, of leaders, of communities to kind of take it up. And in that way, you're looking at it, in my view, with a degree of hope. You're also looking at it with a degree of humility. I mean, I think there's some arrogance sometimes built in all of us to feel like we can accomplish shifting this system in our lifetime. It took multiple lifetimes for us to get here. So it's going to take multiple lifetimes for us to undo. But it doesn't let us off the hook because there are things we can do in our lifetime, in the lanes that we've been given to serve as stepping stones for people who come after us. Hope that's helpful.
That's really, yeah, that is, I like your paralysis of analysis. Don't get me started on, you know, more studies. So yeah, and I do not disagree with you. The only thing that I see a little bit more urgency in some of it because the IPCC and some other studies that have given us 10 years, and that was a couple of years ago. So I would kind of marry your analysis and way to look at this it with a little bit more urgency, but I totally get it. And, you know, I think it's a good way to not get discouraged as well.
DJ, I wanted to add.
Oh, Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's a really dark side of what we're looking at now, the pandemic. I mean, COVID-19, this is one pandemic. That same report you just mentioned, I always get the initials wrong, ICCP. But
I do.
There we go. Well, we're going to be getting more pandemics. This is not the only pandemic. We are seeing already more diseases spread from mosquitoes. So I bring that into it because what happened? people went to the stores and they bought all this stuff, and then there was no stuff to buy for a while, and then a lot of people lost their jobs and didn't have any money to spend. So some fallout, you know, it's you know, you see where I'm going, and it's pretty dark. So I agree with you completely about the urgency. And in this case, I don't have any answers, but what I'm seeing is, you know, suddenly, you know, you couldn't go to these stores and buy those plastic toys you don't need, and other stuff. So it's just, I don't know, that popped into my head that, you know, our new reality of climate change that's already here, that alone can help make the connection on its own. You know, suddenly there was all kinds of stuff you didn't need. You know, you didn't need the takeout that comes in styrofoam and plastic. You know, suddenly people were cooking more at home. And, you know, I'm not saying a pandemic is a good thing, but I'm just saying that some changes are going to come regardless of the work we all do anyway. That's it.
Well, and it was an intersection that everything that was already weak in our systems kind of was amplified. So, and I think people got to know their own family, you know, I mean, because they were kind of stuck, right? I mean, I'm very glad for what happened, but some people had a little transition period there. Ranjana, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take up your time. Please.
Not at all. So I want to say, add one thing when we're talking about, I noticed in chat talk about plastic bag bans. My state of Texas banned plastic bag bans. When Laredo passed a bag ban and it was working, within the year, they overrode the bag bans everywhere. So I want to talk about, just very briefly, about how much voting matters. Even though we see politicians who don't really care too much about environmental issues, their attention is elsewhere, and I completely get that we are in an existential crisis. It's important to vote in every election. Local elections count a great deal. State elections count a great deal. It's not just the every 4-year thing that people often think it is. And the thing about, you know, capitalism, American consumerism, and what it's doing to the environment, I think we've been taught to think about growth as being really important. More is better. And in this pursuit of more, we have sacrificed the environment, but we've not really thought about distribution. You know, so you talk about curbing consumerism, and we don't really think about who gets the goods. Does everybody have enough? Is enough good enough? And I think that is something that we really have to start talking about. I'm an economist, and so I very much have seen how, you know, economic growth is consumption driven, and everything in our culture is about promoting consumerism. And I think we need to start attributing costs, the environmental costs, to this kind of consumerism. So thanks.
Absolutely, because it comes down to, again, to some of the systemic racism and injustice, because not everybody has access to those things as well. So yeah, so we've got a comment here. It said the petrochemical plant being built in Beaver County, PA by Dutch Shell is almost complete. It has created a temporary influx of several thousand jobs, but has not gone up. Awaiting the building of a delivery system for its main ingredient, methane, which is 90 miles away in Washington County. To do this, the plan is to create the Falcon pipeline, which will deliver the ethane to the cracker plant. The pipeline is expected to cross over 20 waterways. The health of water, air, plants, and all animals are at great risk. It has been all about jobs. At the end, only 600 permanent jobs are promised. How can we get Governor Wolf, or any government, I would say, to understand the futility of this old business model? Instead, why not use the same workers for X number of years to dismantle the petrochemical plant and then create a solar farm or green industrial park on the property? I found that kind of intriguing. Any comments from our panel? well, we'll just leave that one for now. I will remind people that as well as the video from today and the chat, I understand will be available, and so maybe we definitely will continue a lot of this. So because we've got a lot of work to do in regard to animals. I just read a report the other day. 68% of the animals on this planet in the last 50 years have been eliminated. They are gone. So it is, it's urgent. So let me see if I can find, okay, Luke, you didn't get a chance to comment on any of these last questions. Would you like a moment?
Yeah. So, like in the chat about the chemical plant, that the potential of dismantling it themselves, I would like to talk about how direct action as a technique for change is inherently, well, maybe not better, but more effective in many cases than just appealing to elected and media positions. Because even though elected positions are like purportedly democratic, direct action is the epiphany of democracy because it is simply relying on your numbers, whereas elected officials speaking to them would be relying on their power instead of your quantity and your public opinion. And also, I agree with the fundamental idea that there should not be people owning things who aren't directly affected by them and people making decisions that hurt other people but not them. So for that reason, I would, in principle, support the idea of a worker-owned solar farm instead of a CEO-owned petro plant. And also just solar is green, so that's.
I was just notified that General Russel Honaré has now joined us. He has served our country honorably for decades, and since his retirement, he has become an outspoken leader of his community in Louisiana against the chemical plants. And so I welcome General Honaré. Please expand on my very weak introduction, General.
Well, thank you. I've been enjoying the conversation. Luke, you scared the hell out of me with that concept you got there. But you're the future. Y'all can do that when y'all take charge of the government. But we're up against a global industry that made big promises that they borrow a line from that movie from the youth of my children, Don't Worry, Be Happy, Kuma Matata. It's all going to be cyclic. We can use this plastic to do everything from making the cover to our cell phones to giving you the convenience of having water or something to drink anytime you want. You could go to the store and we'll put it in plastic bags. Don't worry about it. We've got a recycle system. They have been very proficient at producing plastics, but they've lied about everything else that industry said they were going to do about keeping our environment safe from the impact of plastic waste. You know, there are some states, even New York, they still dump garbage off the coast. Those plastic bags don't go away. On the other hand, we saved a lot of lives in Katrina because we're able to distribute water. And how do we distribute water? Plastic bottles. So while we have these proliferation of plastics as a way for convenience and for our entertainment, it has invaded our life and our workspace. And what we don't see, the rest of the world and the rest of America in many places don't see, that there is a bill that is paid at the point of production of the enabling petrochemical industry that produced the enablers to make plastic, that turned it into those things Diane Wilson found down there in the coast. That's the physical thing you see, but it also has an impact on the air that we breathe and the production water that's used to produce those plastic enablers. And I don't know if Julie brought it up earlier, but we live in a place here in Louisiana called Cancer Alley. The Obama administration called that space between Houston and New Orleans the chemical corridor. Written underneath that, we have had a proliferation of petrochemical plants, many of them producing enabling chemicals or noodles that are used in the plastic industry. And that's come about because of two things. We're on a major transportation corridor out of Houston and the whole state of Louisiana. And the plants want to be on the transportation corridor so they can bring that cheap natural gas in to produce it. We have weak environmental laws, and it's cheaper for them to produce it. The downside is not just the plastic bag that you see that get wrapped around some turtle's neck, or the six-pack holder that you see around the neck of some aquatic animal. At the point of production, there is a invisible killer there. And it comes out of the pipes of these plants, and it has the biggest impact on the communities that live next to these. We just put a paper out in Public Health you might want to take a look at, that people who live in the shadows of these plants have a 10-year less life expectancy of the average American, because by where they live. And they live in the chemical corridor, as we call it, Cancer Alley. As a result of the petrochemical industry, much of it is driven to provide the feedstock to produce plastics. And again, plastic has, someone used that word earlier, has been culturally accepted in America. And it will take a cultural shift, not just laws, to get us to change. Because it's been infused in our culture, everything from the plastic straw to the plastic bag. It was kind of the same way with styrofoam. We're able to get much of that styrofoam out by what Lou said was direct action. People said, hey, we're not buying your hamburgers anymore if you're going to serve it to us in styrofoam. Industry listened. And there's still some losers out there that still serve things in styrofoam. But that's an example of how we can make a difference and get industry change. But all they did was went from, in many cases, from styrofoam to plastic, which fed into this petrochemical complex that they can get cheap gas in Louisiana. They have loose environmental regulation, and they can produce as much as they want, and they have forgotten, and they have taken regulatory capture of our legislatures, as they did the example in Texas with the bag deposit, or they've done here in Louisiana. Regulatory capture is when the industry that's being regulated tell the regulators what to do. And that has happened in Louisiana, hands down. And we have not been able to control the growth of or control the amount of pollution that's coming out of these plants. And it was evident recently when the COVID pandemic hit St. John Parish, they had the highest per capita rate of death in America. And that's now been replaced by Iberville Parish, which is the home of Dow Chemical, and West Baton Rouge Parish, which is right across the street from Exxon and other plants. Why? Because the comorbidities that's created from ingesting H2S, chloroprene, and a whole list of other things associated with the petrochemical industry, people's lungs were capacity were reduced from the VOCs and the P2.5 that the Harvard satellite showed us. And so the data, again, is confirming that these industries at the point of production is killing people. And on the other side, the finished products, the end state of plastics ended up in the ocean and ended up inside the food chain is becoming ever more evident every day. I went to Yemen in the 1980s. They were having severe water problems, so they were shipping water in by the bottle. And we went in this one village. And in their culture, if they didn't like something, they threw it in the street in the public space. And as we drove down the road, I asked the driver, what is that sound? Well, he said, that's the plastic bottles on the street. They introduced plastic drinking bottles, but they don't have a waste management system. They don't have a garbage pickup system. So when people get done with their plastic bottle, they throw them in the street. And that was in the 1980s. But what that showed me was we've got a problem. And that problem's only gotten bigger. At the consumer end, and that we'll accept that damn plastic bag, or we'll easily drink out of that plastic bottle, either for convenience or for safety. So we're a part of the problem. Our government has allowed these businesses to expand production-wise in Louisiana. And as consumers, we've become suckers to the plastic business. Why? Because it's convenience, and we don't want to remember to have to take our shopping bag with us to the store. And we don't want to this inconvenience the clerk and say, I'd rather have paper. I left my shopping bag. Or we're buying that $5 bottle of water in the airport as opposed to carrying a reusable bottle with us, and we go to the nearby fountain and draw water. So we need a cultural shift, but we need shift in laws also. And we've seen a cultural shift before. We did it with smoking. We used to smoke everywhere. It was in movies. It was cool to smoke. It had permeated our society. I went to Army school and the smokers sat in the back. I rode on a plane as a colonel to Spain, and the smokers rode on the back of the plane. Why? Because it was culturally acceptable. We need a cultural shift. We got one on smoking, and the amount of people smoking now has been severely reduced. We need a cultural shift on plastic. We've done this before in America, and globally we can do it again. And there are some countries that are making significant strides in the reduction of plastics and the garbage from plastic. We will probably have to look to them to lead, and we're probably going to have to look to mayors in America to create the laws that will start to shift us from reusable plastic. And that plastic that is produced, we have to have a reuse tax on it to make sure it gets sent to the right place where it can be reused, which will reduce the amount of requirement for raw products. And we've got to speak loud, and we've got to find friends wherever we can, but we can start at home by raising the next generation, and folks like young Luke here taking that into the next decades to try to wean us off this obsession with plastic, because it's ending up in the ocean, and the ocean is bringing back to our seas. And opposed to visualizing a world of sand on the beach, it's going to be damn plastic. and we have to be brutal. We have to get in the face of our government, and we've got to make changes where we can. Because just studying the problem is not going to get it done. We got to start getting stuff done. And those that are going to take the lead need to stop taking that plastic bag, need to go to the city council. If you don't vote for people that don't believe in climate change, and make sure everybody in your family got the word. And if they walk in your house with a plastic bag, throw their ass out. We got to get real about this. We got to stop bullshitting ourselves, because right now we're bullshitting ourselves. We've got and we're still taking plastic bottles to drink out of. We've got to be disciples on this if we're going to make a difference. I apologize for going so long, but thank you very much for listening.
No, sir, it was exactly, looking at the comments, it's exactly what we all needed to hear. And I'm a hopeful reformist, and I'm Haudenosaunee, and some of our government structure was built on our great law of peace. And it was also a tenet of our society, of our culture, to participate in our self-governance. So we need to speak to more people about participating. We have too many people who aren't participating. I preach it all the time. Get in there and support them, or run yourself, school board, county seat, whatever it is, get there and do it. And then everyone else, if you're going to be a first servant of the people, which is what the definition of a leader was in my ancestors' way, then you get our support. So thank you very much. I'm glad you could join us. I know that you and your community have had things to deal with the last hurricane, and so we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And you might have another opportunity to share. So a couple things, and I try not to shift too much, but we've had a few questions in the chat about alternatives plastic, bioplastic, or recycling, which we know isn't really happening. So does anyone have any, I have a total opinion on bioplastics, because they're really no different than the petrochemical based plastics, and they still need petrochemicals to be produced, and we're still taking from the earth what we really don't need and is damaging. But does anyone else on this panel have any opinions on alternatives to plastic? I just think single use itself should be rejected, but I will leave it to anyone who has something else to say about that. Diane, Ranjana, Will, or we can just leave my rant there to lay. Everybody has been doing so much. I'm just blown away. So let me look in here and see if I can find another question. And please look at the chat. If you get a chance, you're able to copy and paste it into your own computer system for later use. Ranjana has been posted an article on the trade deal, I guess, that Trump made to ship plastic waste over to Africa, because out of sight, out of mind, right? Let me see. I don't want too much silence, but I think someone posted here too that they were facing an incinerator, a plastic or a garbage incinerator that they had already beat at one point, and they just learned, it's in Ohio, that it's coming back. So any advice on that? Bringing up that they already won. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to offer to that?
I do. I kind of, but it's not directly to that, but it's connected to that, and it comes back to Honaré's work with the Green Army here, because we were talking about how the victories happen and what's done, and what I see is the focus on legislation, and each legislative session to have bills that people are watching and fighting against, which is, something to do with when you have a victory and then it gets overturned, and, making sure that the vote not only works, that people come out to vote, and that, we get new people running for office, and encouraging that kind of thing. And I think that has been some of the effective work in Louisiana, because each law that is fought back, like the laws to put activists away for protesting against pipelines and infrastructure that were put forth by ALEC, which is happening across the country, that watching that and showing up and making sure calls are made to politicians so that they can't just vote for them without understanding them and knowing how much people are against them, that's critical. And that would definitely impact victories that are overturned. And maybe Honaré wants to comment on that.
Well, thank you, Ms. Julie. You know, our nation runs off the Constitution, and it runs off laws, and it runs off rulings inside the states and policy. And that gives the industry the right to do just what the hell they want if they can get those or bend those laws. Since the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act were written, every year Congress has tried to reduce the impact of the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act. And in the last 3 years, they've had a field day in getting through executive order or through adjusting regulations that's been successfully challenged by many federal judges to reduce the requirements for Clean Air and Clean Water Act. We need to be only aware of that. And if you're going to, we can go out and protest, we can walk up and down the street, but at the end of the day, you've got to fight the policy. You got to shift the policy. And that happens inside of states and inside of parishes. A related topic, we got St. John Parish. We went to them, they were about to give another tax break to Marathon Oil out of Ohio, who's been running a plant there for 30 years. Marathon Oil were paying basically like 1 or 2% property tax. And the parish kept giving them this tax break because of the jobs. Well, guess what? Marathon Oil is not going anywhere. But they kept giving them the tax break as an incentive to stay there. This year, the parish said no. The parish budget doubled because they stopped giving Marathon Oil a tax break. Now they've got money to invest in schools. They got money to make themselves more independent and provide better health care for the community and better roads. So that was done because we got the law change that allow parishes, which we have here in Louisiana, to determine whether they wanted to give that tax break. Up until that time, a state board approved tax giveaways called corporate welfare to encourage companies to come build in Louisiana. But we don't have to encourage them to come here. Why? Because we let them pollute as much as they want, and we got a low tax rate. And we are a non-union state. And we got the Mississippi River. We got things that they want, and we were giving them tax break. How stupid that is. But we got that law changed by fighting in the legislature. We also got the data about cancer clusters. We went in the legislature and we got that law changed so we can have a better determination of where are the cancer clusters based on where people live. Because up until that point, the state would not let us have that information because they had violated HIPAA. Can you believe that? We're not going to tell you how many people in this parish have been treated for cancer because it would violate their HIPAA rights. That is the stupid stuff we have to deal with. We had a Chinese company that wanted to build a plant. We knew they were fast tracking the permits. So we went to the parish. We couldn't get the state to stop them. And we said, why are y'all letting a Chinese communist-owned company build a plant on the Mississippi River? And China has just launched 2 more aircraft carriers. What in the hell are y'all doing? The plant was owned by the Chinese government, by the Chinese Communist Party. Well, these old Cajun boys, they roll back on, you said the Chinese Communist Party, General? I said, yeah. Why in the hell you letting them build a plant on Mississippi River? What happened when we get into conflict with China and they blow the damn Mississippi River? This plant is owned by the Chinese Communist Party. So this activism involved in policy at the state level and in the parish level is not to be discounted. The problem is you got to do this from the heart because they have money and we don't have money. But we got people. And I believe in the power of people. If people get up and make their voice heard, if they can find them some local university scientists and lawyers to help do this research and bring that information forward, the wins we've had is because we've been able to feed this into the media, we've been able to feed it into the legislature, we've been able to feed it in at the parish government, and it become public information. So we've had small wins, but you got to be active in that legislative session, and you've got to be active in those county planning and zoning board meeting, and you have to bring them facts because the lobbyists are lying to them. The lobbyists that say to put this plant there have bought these legislators off, and in many cases, they've given them money to run for office. So that in a nutshell, you got to be active on the policy side at state and parish county level, and you got to expose the fact that these people in the legislature took this much money from the petrochemical. Because you know the people on the street, they don't want to see this happening. But these legislators are operating in their own world, and the parish officials are operating in their own world. And you got to have a friendly media that tells that story in the local media. And with the power of Facebook and Instagram is to get that community registered on social media so you can share this information with them, because many of them are operating in the dark. They don't know what's going on in their own parish. And creating those social media groups is as important as anything you can do. You can teach Granny how to use Facebook. And the people that are most active are the elderly. And we've got to keep them informed so they will show up at that parish or county meeting. And they will come in there and let their voices be heard. And they give great testimony. But you gotta attack the policy issues for sure. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, General. And I'm glad you brought up the Mississippi River too, because it's so important that as much as we can to partner in this, to elevate our stories, your story, our story, because ultimately, if these cracker plants and plastic plants are built along the Ohio River over here on the West Virginia side, it's going to affect you as well, because the Ohio runs right into the Mississippi. So 5,000 people initially, their drinking water is at risk, and ultimately all the way down to the Gulf. So thank you. Yeah, I can't agree more with that. We had another question, and I really wish we had like the rest of the day to talk with each other. This has been so inspiring, and the comments, if you get a chance, read some of the comments before we switch over, because people are just pouring their hearts out, and it's very inspiring. So how do you think a shift away from plastics and petrochemicals will coincide with the anti-racist and anti-poverty work, that intersectional thing we keep talking about, how we can connect the dots for people, I guess? Just open it up, go for it, anyone. Or I'll call on you. Okay, I'm gonna pick a person.
Looks like Ranjana maybe unmuted herself. Yeah.
Thanks, Kelsey.
I just, I think I talked about this a little bit when I made my comments. I think it is really, really important because, yes, plastics and oil and gas harm communities, but disproportionate amount of harm is inflicted on communities of color. It's inflicted on poor people. And so it's very important to recognize that in our work as organizers, as people fighting back against those industries. And I think that is really, really important to do. I just want to reiterate that. And I think there has been some shifting in mood recently. And I think the time, probably this is a better time. As I told everybody, we live in a community where our city government is very pro-drilling. And yet, because of the harm to a community of color, they actually voted down some gas wells and denied a gas well permit because we were able to show that it disproportionately impacted people of color. So if people are more attuned to this, I think it's important for us to make it even, make it prominent and make it front and center. And of course, there is the moral question. There is the moral question of how we apportion harms in this country. And it's past time. It's past time that we stop doing that.
Thank you. We had another comment from Dylan. He said, the American people are too busy thinking about TGIF. Too many people are focused on entertainment, hence sports 24/7, focus on sexuality and dress and advertising. We need to reset our priorities and reset our moral compass. In his opinion, many people on the street are clueless. I agree. If they are not educated as to what is happening, they will not be there to rise up and speak out for the rights of all rights. COVID is the nature's way of saying stop, time out, and readjust what you're doing to Mother Earth. Also, I'd like to add that, a couple of our organizers are raising money to put ads in newspapers, to write op-eds and letters to the editor in their local papers. What Julie said, though, that our media and the fourth estate, what we call our media, who it's also guaranteed or protected in the Constitution, that we need to start talking, we need to start building back up our local media. And what General Honaré said, teaching Granny to use Facebook, well, old people doing stuff, hello. Anyway, we can do it. So let's see what we got here. I can't even keep up with all these comments. We're about 10-15 minutes away from our close. And in about 10 minutes, I'm going to turn this over to Alice, who's going to be facilitating the second half of our event today. And I really encourage our panelists, if you can spend the time to be with us in the second half with our breakout sessions, with the people that are here that are going to stay with us. I hope everyone that's here now will stay. Invite your friends, have them come in and join us for this conversation, because we're going to have some kind of pointed questions that we hope will coalesce into ways forward, because this isn't the end. We've optimistically talked about more work together. Our initial group here, bringing more people in, so maybe that'll work. I'm going to put out some good minds, and so that will happen. So I think I'm going to go around to all the panelists. If you have any closing thoughts, please offer them now. So I'm going to let's start with Luke. We haven't heard a lot from Luke and Will. So let's go to Luke and then Will, please.
Yeah. So first, I'm just going to say thank you to all other panelists. This was a very good experience, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. And so yeah, there are lots of different views and solutions, but it's clear that there is a problem. And especially locally, lots of work can be done to combat the Appalachian Petrochemical Hub, which I would encourage all of you watching to look into and sign petitions for. Also, any youths out there, you could join Ohio Youth for Climate Justice or Young Activist Coalition to get involved in these issues yourself if you're looking for a place to start.
Thank you very much, Luke. Will?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo, you know, it's been an honor to be a part of this conversation, this powerful group. You know, I want to articulate, there's power, you know, on this call. There are power in these circles, you know. I want to go back to something you said, BJ, about, you know, what is the effect as kind of the movement, you know, against plastics, against, you know, this devastation, this environmental pollution that we see kind of coalesce with the movement for, you know, anti-racism movement, anti-poverty movement. I mean, you all heard at the top of the call, for me, the coalition is front of mind, you know, the coalition building. For me, the inner issue, the intersectionality of these issues is front of mind. I would just continue to articulate that as we lean into those spaces, as we continue to build those multi-issue, multi-identity coalitions on the ground locally, recognize that that doesn't only give us power to have victories against these environmentally racist motivated projects, it actually gives us the opportunity to breathe new life into our democracy. That coalition, like where we see the multi-issues, we see that we have to bring in a diverse set of people standing together, that is what can literally, you know, save this country in this moment. You know, we articulate in our lens of work the intersections of poverty, of climate, of democracy, of systemic racism. All of that is linked, and it forms a vicious nexus which we see manifest in different ways in different communities. But the key is that the solution is that cohesive narrative, recognizing these issues are interlinked, we are interlinked, and our response must be so. You know, a quick piece, recognize we don't get ambitious action that we need on our ecological crisis without solving our democracy crisis. There's no way. And recognize that our democracy crisis, the attacks on voting rights have too often been racialized and tried to be pushed to the side as an issue for like Black folks. But what happens is candidates who most often benefit from voter suppression and other racially motivated tactics get into office in the South and then end up passing policies that hurt all people and a majority of white people just based on numbers. So these issues are intersected. Recognize that, you know, 2016, I say this everywhere I go, was the first presidential election in 50 years without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act. Something happened in 2016, and then see all of the ecological impact and devastation and rollbacks that we've seen, you know, coming out of that and out of this administration. So these issues are absolutely interlinked. The more that we lean into conversations like this and link up with one another, the more I'm encouraged. So I'm so thankful to the organizers of this call, because I fully believe that spaces that look like this don't only possess the ability to allow us to win on the local level, but to allow us to win more broadly on these issues.
Thank you, Will. Very powerful. I mean, words really are inadequate at this point in time for my gratitude. And it's been just humbling to be part of this panel, part of the group that's put these events on. Diane, Ranjana, your final thoughts.
I've got one. I just wanted to re-emphasize the importance of the media, people like Julia. When you're in small communities, when you're isolated, when your community doesn't listen often, and I've found it especially true in my area, is that when your story can get amplified by the bigger media and it comes from the outside in, is like they suddenly see it a little bit different because they have a way of looking at you anyway and having you in a box, and to get an outside perspective is very, very important. So people like Julia is very important, and the media is very important. And also it's very important to have these organizations that have the broader picture, because a lot of people, for example, if they're not up close to, say, for instance, the nurdles or the plastic or the powder in the water, they're like, they don't see how how they're related to it. But when you can show how the fracking is related to the petrochemical development, which is related to the packaging, which is related to the trains and the buses that are carrying all this product, then as has been brought out, there's so many people that are interrelated to this very same problem. And the last thing I wanted to say is, for people who want something they can do right now, and it's free, you can go to, and you're around the water and you're concerned about that plastic pollution, you can go to nerdlepatrol.org, and they're giving away free startup kits. So you can go down to the creek or your ocean or your beach or your river. And if you're anywhere around any kind of a plastic facility, manufacturing, packaging, train, you name it, and you can track the pellets in those little, and they're taking that data and they're making a global tracking of the pollution. And that is something you can do right now, and it's free. That's nerdlepatrol.org. That's it.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Ranjana and Julie, we have left. Ranjana, your closing thoughts, please.
First, I want to thank you all for inviting me. It's a real honor for me to be here. And I just want to reiterate what some of our great panelists have already said. All my work is really about fracking pollution. But the thing that I run into again and again and again is the real pollution of our political process because of oil and gas money. And so when we fight, our battles against gas wells, we are really fighting for our democracy, as a panelist before me said. And that's really important. And the other thing I want to say is grassroots action matters. We feel pretty powerless in front of a big industry and its political machine in communities like mine everywhere. But we are not powerless. Grassroots action matters. And right now, the only wins that are really possible are local wins. So our work matters. And then what Diane just said, the story we tell, it's important for that story to be, inclusive, to connect the dots, because that is how, we make our case. That is how we bring people along. And so it's sort of important to make sure that we are telling the right story and that it is inclusive, and it not only focuses on the small picture, but on the big picture. Thanks again for having me.
My gratitude to you as well. General, your closing thoughts, please, and then we'll finish up with our revered journalist, Julie.
Well, thank you very much. I think we have to make that shift to drive our new economy. We could do that by finding solutions to pollution. To drive our new economy, we could do that by driving solution to pollution. Looking at the last 80 years, the stuff we polluted, we go clean it up and create jobs. It creates cleaner water. It creates better food for us to eat and safer places for animals and safer places for us to live. That is my mission with the Green Army, is finding solutions to pollution. And if we could keep it in the pipe and not have an impact on the solution to the earth, good. If we can't, it needs to go away. So we can drive that by taking on a mission of not trying to reset the world to one type of energy, but how do we find solutions to pollution? Because everything pollutes. It's how that we find that sweet spot where we can get to the negative side of the amount of pollution we put in the air and the water, as opposed to continue to grow the amount of pollution we're putting in the water. And that into itself could be that solar field, it could be that wind field, it could be a new system that can really reduce hard plastics and have a negative impact on the environment. Finding solutions to pollution is the only way we're going to save Mother Earth, because we are polluting every day. God bless you. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you, General. And I couldn't agree more, because I tell people all the time that everything we do has a consequence. So it's our responsibility to make sure that the consequence that we leave is the least damaging, because we take, right? And we don't give back enough. So Julie, would you like to wrap us up? And then I'm going to turn to Alice to introduce the rest of our day, because she's taking over. Thank you very much, Alice. Julie.
Sure. First, thanks again for including me in the panel. And then second, I want to address a comment which will help me close out here. Someone said that I need to contextualize the decline of our media. And yes, that's very key, is that our media, for the most part, is corporate owned. I'd say 98%. That's what studies show. So you can follow your local TV station back to its owner and see if it's owned by General Electric, Comcast. But the thing is, I don't want people to be discouraged by that. It is discouraging, and it's scary as heck when you really look at that. So one thing you can do is you can support, and I'm not talking about with money, I'm talking about reading and sharing stories from DeSmog, where I publish most of my work, Inside Climate News, ProPublica, and granted, they also, you can follow the money and see who's funding them, or The Guardian. But even those places, their budgets get cut due to the pandemic and a faltering economy. You find less and less people, and even in independent media, photographers are sidelined because there are free pictures people can use and people don't see the value. But I digress. But what I wanted to say, though, on a positive note, is even though it's corporate media that we're mostly getting our information from, those of us who don't scour Facebook and Twitter and follow people who are on the ground, which, you know, everyone needs to develop their own messaging. That's key. What Diane has done, and Ranjana and the Green Army, putting out their own information, because people do really follow that. But know that when during the BP oil spill, if there's public interest in a problem, people like me get on Fox News and speak about what we're seeing. I was on Fox and I was on CNN, and covering the recent oil spills all over the coast from Cameron to Creole. Following Laura, I put out pictures of the oil spill, and no one was covering that, and a local Fox affiliate wanted to use the pictures, and I gave them permission to. Granted, they got sidelined by Sally. And our local newspaper, the Advocate, NOLA.com, which is corporate owned by owners who are very pro-industry, they're going to be running some of those pictures. I made them available. And it's because their readership, whether they're pro or against industry, people want to know, people want to see, people care that the migratory birds are going to be flying through. So it's a matter of also, when you see a story that's well done and good and important, share it, make sure other people see it. And that's all I can say.
That's a lot, Julie. And I'm just going to add to that, the decline of independent media. It's tough sometimes. And sometimes I get kind of, you know, like everything's behind a paywall. But if you can, subscribe to these publications. It really does make a difference. If it's $5 or $10, whatever it is a month, it all adds up. So, you know, use your own judgment, but that does help too. So like I said, words are inadequate. I've read the comments here. People have said this is probably one of the most awesome discussions, one of the most relevant, useful they've attended. Thank you very much for that comment. Your encouragement really does help us, especially those of us who have a hard time getting out of our shell. So yeah, thank you all for attending, but my panelists, I just great admiration for all of the work that you do. And anything I can do to help too, please let me know. I think you have my email now. So I'm going to pass this over to Alice Menendez. She is one of the deep thinkers I told you about in the beginning. She gives us the hard questions and holds our feet to the fire. So I hope you all can continue to stay with us today. I'm going to be here. Panelists, you're welcome. So thank you, Nawen Scano, and we will talk to you later. Alice, please.